All right, Miss Heidi, you ready?
Yes, we are ready to go.
All
Oops.
right, well, let's get started. All right, good afternoon, everyone. I am Jonathan Bricker, and I'm the chairman for the Arkansas District Export Council. And I want to welcome you to Doing Business in Australia, featuring Mr. Paul Ostaff, who is an international market entry consultant. Thank you for being here, Mr. Ostaff. I want to
Pleasure to be
begin
here,
by
sir.
I want to begin by thanking our sponsors. This webinar is possible thanks to our partnership with the Arkansas Economic Development Commission and Arkansas Manufacturing Solutions. Without their support, we would not be able to hold this free webinar and market it to companies and individuals such as yourselves. So thank you both to the AEDC and AMS. I really appreciate you all joining us today. For those of you that aren't quite sure who the deck is and what we do, allow me to do a quick introduction. We're a private, nonprofit organization that brings together experienced international business people with potential exporters. Each deck member has been appointed by the U.S. Secretary of Commerce for our real-world expertise in international trade. We have a ton of experience within our council in many different sectors. Now, having said that, we don't know all of the answers, but we can introduce you to someone who does. We are a community of connections within the exporting world. My hope for the day is that you walk away from this webinar with more confidence in your exporting abilities. If you have any questions throughout this webinar and you don't feel comfortable asking it here, I invite you to reach out to us on our website, exportarkansas.org, and we'll have one of our members reach out to you. Basically, we want to be your strategic partner to help you grow your exports, which helps grow your bottom line. I'm a firm believer in that you can't start planning too soon. So I also want to bring to your attention and invite you to join us for our 14th annual Governor's Award for Excellence in Global Trade. We are hosting this event Thursday, October 3rd. The awards dinner, or actually this year we're going to have it as a luncheon, not a dinner. We're switching it up a little bit, but it's a networking reception for the Arkansas business community, and it's being held at Robinson Hall in downtown Little Rock. This award recognizes the exporting success among Arkansas's manufacturers and agricultural companies that are trading in international markets. We present each winning company with a trophy and certificate during the ceremony, and then they are profiled throughout the year as winners of the Governor's Award on our website and throughout social media. All right, there's my slight advertisement. Before we begin, I want to remind everyone to please keep themselves muted and raise your hand if you'd like to ask a question, or feel free to put it in the chat. We just want to kind of cut down on some of the background noise that might interrupt our speakers. So I appreciate everyone's diligence in that. I'll introduce everyone to your moderator this afternoon, Mr. Rudy Ortiz. Rudy has recently retired from the AEDC and is the previous chairman of the DEC. Today, he is the owner of Strategic Business Services, LLC, where he helps companies in a wide variety of international business needs. He's also a partner with Cross Border Business Consultants, which is a global team of elite international business consultants that help companies initiate business in other countries. For this reasons, he is the DEC's education chair. Rudy, thank you so much for spearheading all this. And with that, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. So as it turns out, we're going to be having Paul Ostaff, who's one of my colleagues, who's a business coach and a business consultant out of Melbourne, Australia. And Paul has kind of a neat story, a neat past. He actually is Canadian by birth, but about 20 plus years ago, he moved to Melbourne. He was working for Ford Motor, and I guess he decided that he liked it so much that he decided to stay there in Australia. And we're very glad that he's with us today to share with us some insights about doing business in Australia. As you well know, I often tell people that whenever you're looking at another country, you should assume that things are different than what you are used to, and Australia is no different. Well, we obviously have some cultural ties and other commonalities between the United States and Australia, but there are also some significant differences as well. And Paul will be covering some of those things as well. So Paul, with that, let's go ahead and get you started on your presentation, and I will stay on as well to discuss some of these things.
Fantastic. Well, thank you everyone for dropping in today, and I hope you enjoy the presentation. And certainly, Rudy and I are going to have a conversation. You're going to see some slides, but this isn't like Star Wars. We see the words starting to come up from the bottom of the screen, and they just keep going up, and that's all you're reading. I've been to too many of those, and probably so have you. So we're going to have a bit of a conversation going. So we'll bring up some points, but there will be some conversation happening, and please jump in. If there's a question, thing I say or something, please ask about it. Let's have a chat. Because at the end of the day, we're talking about similarities and differences, and this is where the money is. Because we're slightly different. You have different skills and experience. If you can bring something here that can help us solve a problem, hey, you'll be a hero over here, and hopefully you'll be rewarded for it. So let's start with this slide share. I'm hoping that's coming across now. Do you see that?
It is.
Fantastic. Yep. All right. Well, thank you again for having me today. Really appreciate that. And basically, I'm based here in Melbourne, Australia. We like to argue with Sydney that we're the largest city in Australia, but we're 1 and 2. And we're if you're wondering, we're in the southeast corner of the country. Slide. Let's go. Whoops.
There you go.
There we go. And I wanted to say, well, Australia is similar but different. And this is something, it's hard to comprehend, because I know in the atlases, Australia and New Zealand are always on the last page of everybody's atlas. So it's the last thing everybody looks at. But the reality is this, Australia is a huge country. It's a continent. As you can see, we're very similar in size to America, but we only have 1/15 of the people. So there's a lot of, as they say, there's miles and miles and miles, they're just miles. That can be very true here. And when we're thinking today, anything you see, the question is, are there lessons learned in America that can be shared profitably in Australia? We don't have the people. We don't have the technology. We don't have the know-how that you do. You might not have the insights that you do. So with anything I say, there might be something in there for you and your business, and that's why we've listed it like we have today. So, for example, well, all right, let's talk about some lessons. He said, well, what can we say? Look, distances are huge. Infrastructure is very important. If you came over here, you're used to the driving. We were just talking, Rudy and I are talking about driving on the interstate highway system. We don't have an interstate highway system. It took us 50 years to connect Melbourne to Sydney with a 4-lane road. Most of it's freeway. It's not, we wouldn't call it a proper freeway in America, but it's, a freeway sort of. And that's it. The rest of it can go down to 2-lane highways really quickly, or, we were talking about they call it natural surface. Well, the natural surface they're talking about is they dropped a blade, they actually cleared off some ground, and that's what you drive on, which works well if it's not raining. And we were just talking about a community being isolated for weeks because it's a bog. They had some heavy rain, washed out the road, and they're actually airdropping food in there. And I said, well, that's not a way of doing business. Well, Rudy and I were talking, hey, you guys build roads that put up with winters. We don't have winter the way, any description compared to American winters. So if you can build up solid roads, you have a technology, you have an approach that can do that. I think we'd be open for it because it really improved the situation here.
Yeah, and Paul, one of I think that's relevant in terms of the points that you're making, and I want to make sure that everybody gets it. There is a free trade agreement between the United States and Australia, and about somewhere between 97 and 99% of the tariffs that exist on almost every product between the United States and Australia are either zero or very, very close to zero. And so doing business in Australia can be lucrative, versus other places like Brazil, where Brazil has an almost 100% tariff on almost all American products. Very, very hard to do business there. But in Australia, we've got a free trade agreement. The barriers to entry are very, very low. And services is, as you well know, one of the fastest growing parts of exports. Companies who are training, for instance, maybe truck drivers, maybe heavy equipment operators, people who are in construction could do well there, and a wide variety of services would be available to submit contracts or proposals for a contract with the Australian government because of the free trade agreement.
So, that's just getting started. As you see, there's a few other points here too. So there's a lot of opportunities to explore. I say that the country is very dry, and it's the wettest continent in the world. Now, very dry means, hey, it's known as the Great Brown Land, for very good reasons. It's a very dry place here. We're not blessed with the lakes. We're very blessed in many ways. But I'm just saying we just don't have the lakes and the rivers that you'd have in Arkansas, and certainly in the central part of the United States. But it's the wettest continent. We sit on the world's largest aquifer. It actually sits under more than half the country. And you say, well, so what? Well, I think I seem to remember that Arkansas has a few aquifers going themselves, and we're not good at managing it. So you see, you have all this water sitting there, and we're not managing it properly. We got leaks, seepages, losses, you name it. And it's been, historically, it's been a real problem managing this stuff. If you can do something sensible with the management of water, you'd be loved here. Because everybody's screaming out for more water. I'm sure they are around the world, but we're screaming for it. We're sitting on it. We just don't know how to manage it properly. Maybe you do know how.
So maybe engineers, different kind of hydro engineers might be suitable to do some business there.
Indeed, at least to ask the question, say, hey, this is what's possible. We don't know. Now I'm being it from my point of view, and maybe other people, in better places. Oh yeah, we've had a look at that. But the point is to get the discussion started, because there's still the problem. I mean, yeah, we might know about it. Yes, we might have people experienced doing this stuff, but there's still a physical problem there. It is a political football. Anytime we talk about water here, if you've got some answers, I think we could use some discussion here. North is hot. South is cold. Remember, we're south of the equator. Melbourne is at 38 degrees, if you know your latitudes, 38 degrees. So, as we say down here at the bottom, it doesn't snow in Melbourne ever, which is, if you like to live in a place like that, come on down. I used to tell, I'm from Toronto myself, Toronto, Canada, and I used to tell people I'd love to live in a place like as beautiful as Toronto, but without the winter, and I found one. Something else for you. Australia is far, far away and very close. It takes you a day to get here. It'd take you a day to, flight time for me to get to Toronto would be at least 24 hours, and on a bad day, it's 32 hours by flights. By the time you connect the flights and everything else and finally get down there. So we're far away. But I say we're very close. A lot of companies are using Australia as a base to service Asia because we're in the same time zones. Singapore, for me, is 7 hours away. And, Perth is in the same time zone. So that makes sense for your business. If you're serving parts in Asia, we're awfully close. And people like Australia because it's a English-speaking country, and we have the rule of law, and we have well-established legal system and so on. So it's very, very solid and reliable. And you can use that as a base to service Asia if that's what your company's doing. I was mentioning here, seasons are reversed. Right now it's autumn here. We don't say fall because in most places in Australia, we don't have the trees that shed leaves. Our gum trees don't shed leaves in the wintertime. But here in Melbourne and places, they prettied it up with a lot of trees, I guess, from England and America. And so we do get some shading, and my daughters can find stacks of leaves to jump in just like yours can. Christmas is in the middle of summer. That might appeal to you. We talked about time zones being different. It's tomorrow here. as we've mentioned. Right now it's about 7:15 on Thursday. So Rudy and I always joke I can start reading the newspaper and seeing, well, IBM's up five points, so he put his money on it before tomorrow comes along. Then all of a sudden he realizes it's 5 points, right? So, but we do have some differences. But it's with each one of these, as we say, there might be a business opportunity. So let's talk about things. Some of the paradigms. We do things slightly differently, and that could be a bit interesting. So driving and walking on the wrong side of the road. And so, yeah, our steering wheels are physically on the right side of the car. You're driving on the left side of the road. And that takes a little bit getting used to. Not a long time, but it takes a while to get yourself attuned to it.
If you can survive the first day, right?
Well, that's right. When I first started driving, I was terrified. So what I did was I rented a car on a Sunday. I had meetings on Monday, but I rented a car on Sunday, and I said, I'm going to sit behind the wheel, and I'm not going to leave the yellow center line until I run out of road. And all I do is say it because they can't move me. See, that way I wouldn't have to change lanes and scare myself. So I just sat there, and I was probably the slowest, Sunday driver going. But I sat there and hugged that yellow line for an hour and a half, and then I ended up facing the beach. And then it took me 15 minutes to figure out where I ended up. But that's how I started. And the next day I was more or less fine. But that it takes a little bit of acclimatization. But walking on the other side as well. So you're on a sidewalk, you walk on the left. And I found this out because I was in Sydney and I was running around doing some shopping. And that was a bit energetic and fun to be here and everything else. I want to get into this. I want to get some stuff for family and friends. And after I flattened 6 people running down the wrong side of the sidewalk, I realized, oh, they walk on the left as well. So please take advantage of my lessons here. Things with money. I mean, money is money, and of course you can madly tap everything here just like you can at home. So it's not the issue anymore. But yeah, we have a 20-cent piece instead of a quarter. Taxes, at least until now, have been built into the price. So if it's a $10 shirt, it's a $10 shirt. You hand over $10, you get your shirt. And a lot of people like that. We don't tip. Now, some of that's starting to creep in as we have international visitors, but generally speaking, you don't tip. It's the workers will tell you we get paid fairly. Don't you worry about that. Things like can openers. Now people say, well, what about can? I'm just trying to show differences here. If you're going to do a can of beans or a can of soup back home, you sit there and you drive the blade into the top of a can, squeeze it down, and of course you wind away and you open up your can. That's how you lift the lid off, right? Australian can openers come from the side. Same idea, clamps on, but it cuts the lid off from the side of the tin, not the top. And just to say, just to open your mind, when you come here traveling, don't just say, well, it's just not like we do it. We might have a slight different style on it. And if observers say that could be useful to us, that might not be useful to us. Don't know. But just an observation.
Hey, Paul, I wanted to jump in on something that you said a little bit earlier. The points that you're making here are that there are opportunities in the differences. And for instance, when it's winter here, it's summer there, and vice versa, right? If you're an ag person and you're producing produce or grapes or whatever it is that you're producing, and there are certain foods that are eaten during certain times of the year, but you could actually almost double your output by looking at other countries, including Australia, whose seasons are exactly the opposite of what we have here, right? You have people that ski in the United States during the winter, and then when it's summer here, guess what? They go to New Zealand or I guess other parts of the South where there is snow, and they ski there as well. They've taken advantage of the differences, and that's the point you're making here.
That's it. And all of you represent different businesses in different industries. You might say, hey, that's something we can do, or we can nail that, or we can take advantage of that. And especially as we will be talking about this a little later, style. How do you present yourself? If you come across here, say, here's my product, this is what you're going to get, take it or leave it, in a very rough style, that might not get a good reception. But you say, look, I understand your grapes are out of season here. We're supplying grapes. You know, we're right in season. Would you like us to stock you some grapes? And everybody said, hey, that's fantastic. I'm fed up with eating apples here in the middle of winter. Give me something else. And you guys have provided the grapes and you're a hero. So if you listen out for these opportunities, it's seen as a real bonus for us, as opposed to, you know, something that just, well, here's another import we're taking. No, these guys are trying to help us out and, you know, give us some variety. You're actually uplifting us with your produce here, and adding to our experience. So I'm saying there's money to be made here. Other ideas. I wanted to also point out, this is my funny. This is my wife said you should have dusted the thing first. This is an electrical outlet, a typical electrical outlet here. Just to give you some ideas, you'll see that we have a different layout for putting your plug in. There's good reason for that. All of our electrical outlets have switches on them. So that's kind of neat. You know, to isolate the switch, so you switch it off, and all of a sudden no power. You know, that's the whole point. And you say, well, what else is there? When you're in America and you want to turn the light on, you flick it up. You flick the switch up, right? Come to Australia, you flick it down. Just one of those things. So is something like this useful to you? Don't know, but it's just something to keep in mind. Oh, this is a good one. Okay, Rudy, what date is it?
Well, if you're in the United States, it's March the 1st, 2024. But if you're Australia, it's what?
It's the 3rd of January, 2024.
Now, why is that important, Paul?
You might ask. For a client, that difference was worth $3 million because they had a contract. They were doing a service contract. They're handing over the servicing of something to somebody else. So they said, well, okay, as of this date, this is where you hand over, this is where you start getting paid, vice versa, right? Well, our American friends said, as Rudy says, well, hey, you know, that's March the 1st. We said it's the 3rd of January. Eventually, they got to the point of saying, you know, and as I said, there's $3 million at stake in that difference. And eventually they said, look, we're never going to solve this. Why don't we just split it down the middle? So everybody just went for, you know, they split it in half and we agreed on $1.5 million. So both of us took a bath for $1.5 million on our expectations. So dumb little things like that can flare up. So I think if we just take the time just to ask, talk through these things, just become aware of, you know, just acclimatize yourself, I think you'll do well. Now, Rudy said, well, what do people like to buy from America? And I asked around, they said classic cars. You know, cars don't rust here. You know, that's a simple statement, but strictly speaking, they don't rust here. They will fade. We have an awfully strong sun. So, you know, the paint jobs and that, you know, there's ways of getting around that, but the cars will fade here, but they will not rust. So you'll see old cars here. You haven't seen it on the roads for 30, 40 years. And you'll be driving it down, you know, just around the corner here, we have a lovely park, and I saw a 1941 Cadillac, nicely done up, and she was sweet. She was in really good condition of that, and yeah, it had been restored, but a lot of it is real. You know, it was real. It was lovely. So there's certainly a market for classic cars. Power tools, good, reliable, rugged power tools, or tools in general. And you say, well, why is that? I said, well, it does two things. You see, when I was growing up, you had the super cheap stuff you could get, and you know, it wouldn't last too long. And you then go to Germany and you get these super, you know, super high quality things, great, precise, cost you a fortune. And then the mid-range, you had American tools. And they were just solid, honest, reliable, did the job, lasted forever. And I was telling Maria, I should have gone out and got one. I'm thinking about the Crescent Tool Company. You know the old Crescent wrenches? And I had a favorite one that was, it was out of cast iron, and then they machined the surfaces on it, so it was a really beautiful thing to look as well as to handle. I said, well, to me, that was America. That was American tool. I mean, it was solid, honest, you know, dependable, delivered the goods, lasted forever. That's the American brand. That's why they want American tools. And their issue is, first of all, we need them. Secondly, just watch the middlemen you employ, because sometimes the prices come outrageously expensive by the time a few extra players get a lot more than perhaps they deserve. And by the time they get on the shelf, we can't afford it. They're charging the famous German prices versus the American prices. But if you can get it there at the right price range, I think we'd like to hear that story. We'd like to hear the story about the quality American tool that just does the job for you. And the person I was talking to was an electrician. He lives with his tools. His service depends on the quality of his tools. If you can provide those tools, he'd love to talk to you. I was saying manufacturing equipment, mining equipment. Manufacturing, they shut down a lot of manufacturing here. If you can supply some manufacturing equipment that gets us up and going again, I think we'd like to hear from you. How about some mining equipment? Mining is worth $350 billion to Australia every year. I think there's a piece in there for you.
And for those of you who might not know, Australia has a lot of raw materials, and up to now, probably because of some of the reasons that Paul has been given in terms of the reduction in manufacturing in Australia, very much like the United States. Australia has a history of digging stuff up, whether it's aluminum or a bauxite, or whether it's other materials, and then shipping them somewhere else to be the next level of value add, right? So they have significant mining operations here in Australia.
Yes, our weather, you got to understand that our weather, first of all, as you say, it's a dry country. A lot of our mines are open pit. And, if you fly over them, they go for miles. Just absolutely huge. So the largest scale open mining operations in the world. They're 24/7. They run 24/7. They literally light them up. I remember flying from Perth to Melbourne, and just getting out of Perth, we saw this great light from down below, and they said, "Well, hang on, we just left Perth. On the map, there's nothing here. What is it?" They said, "Oh, that's all the mines." They light them up like football fields, so they can work at night, so they can run 24/7. So because they're always doing that, they're always shipping the stuff out. Boats are just taking a regular basis, just shipping the ore out, as Rudy said, every day. So huge scale mining here. Transport trucks. We have the heaviest use of transport trucks in the world. So the most demanding situations, we have them here. And if you want to add to the amount, as they say, there's a lot of American manufacturers represented, but we can certainly use some help. How about large, affordable homes? We look at American homes, like those of us who know have traveled to America, look at American homes and marvel. They're bigger. They actually have room for things. They have basements. We don't have basements here. They're solidly made. They probably last 100 years, a lot of them. We don't do that. If you can show us how to do that and affordably, we'd love to hear from you. Ours are not the robustness of your and the solidness of your products. How about just a know-how? How to do something? We don't manufacture everything here. As we said, we shut down a lot of the manufacturing. A lot of stuff we don't know how to do. And we'll talk about how to work together a little later. But Rudy and I were talking about Ford Motor Company. Well, I knew a lot of the graduates from this program, but you have to understand that at the time, Australia didn't have car plants, especially after the war. Didn't have car plants. So you say, well, how do you get started building a car? You can't just start from nothing. So what happened at Ford Motor Company was they recruited a bunch of very smart people onto the graduate program. They trained them up like you would, but they flew them over to America and got them to shadow experienced American engineers, factory managers, and logistics people, whatever it is in the plant. And those guys came back here and built up the plant. And at this best, think of it, going from zero to making 100,000 cars a year. That's pretty good with no prior experience, because America trained us up and supported us. So we're very thankful for that. And that's where we can really use it. If you have stuff that you guys do, that's a great way to train us up, and we'd be very appreciative of that. How about attitude? You say, well, what do you mean about attitude? Well, I said I have a new client. A new client. She's originally from Hong Kong, and she's now living in Melbourne. But curiously, in her history, you see, she spent 10 years in a place called Tennessee. You might have heard of it. So, yeah, she was in Tennessee, loved them. And I know Tennesseans have always treated me well as well. So I share her perspective. They say, so what? I said, you've been in America. You've lived in America as well as coming here. I said, what's the difference? The people today want to, for this presentation, want to know what the difference is. They said, I almost forgot it. But when I was in America, they taught me that I could be anything I wanted to be. We don't have that here. This is what makes you different. This is what makes you special. Now, whether it is, people like Grant Cardone, who wants to sit there and build his real estate empire, and, his pictures of him, sitting on top of his airplane, everyone else, craziest? Yeah, great. We don't do that here. We don't have people like that. And just the attitude that we can go out there and grab something and make it our own and make this vision of ours, that is a unique attitude. That's an American attitude. That is special. That's secret sauce. If you can share some of that with us, it'd be a game changer for us.
Paul, I think it's a really good place for me to segue into something, and I probably should have mentioned it early on, but this is a good place as well. Australia is one of our very, very best allies and partners, and has been basically since World War I. In fact, I would dare say that at this point, Australia is becoming the #1 ally of the United States in the world. And which is one of the reasons that we're about to provide them with nuclear submarines and other things that are going to be important for our national security over the next several decades. And so some of the sort of things that we've been doing with Australia and that we sell to and they sell to us, first of all, in terms of what the United States sells to Australia, in 2023, we sold about let me see here, in just machinery and nuclear reactors, 6.3 billion, vehicles and railway and tramways, 4.7 billion, electrical and electronic equipment, 3.4 billion, optical, photo and technical and medical equipment, 2.5 billion, pharmaceuticals, 2.25 billion, aircraft and spacecraft, 2.2 billion, jewelry and metals, a little bit over 2 billion, commodities, 1.65 billion, minerals and oil and distillation products, 1.3 billion, plastics, 0.5 billion, rubbers, about the same, on and on and on. We sell tons of stuff, everything that's imaginable that the United States makes, that you guys that are out there make, is being sold to Australia. Now, as you guys well know, in many cases, an American company will import raw materials and convert them into widgets and then turn around and export them. So some of the things that Australia sells to us that we buy from Australia are meats, once again, more materials, pharmaceuticals, aluminum, electrical equipment. So there's a lot of exchange, and the reason for that is because they send us the raw materials, and then we convert them and sell that stuff, finished goods, back to them, right? Both ways. And so we have a very, very symbiotic relationship with Australia, and one that is only growing stronger by the day. Australia is part of what is called Five Eyes, which is a national security organization between Canada, United States, Australia, the UK, and so very, very strong alliance there. And they're going to be a partner of ours for a very, very long time. We appreciate the sort of stuff that we buy from them and that we sell to them. So I thought that it was important that you know that everything that you guys are selling, the Australians buy.
It's interesting on that. I was thinking of some Americans I was talking to, and they're saying, well, is it easy for Americans to be accepted here? Because they say, yeah, I get the idea we're a little bit different. I said, well, you got to understand that 2 or 3 weeks ago, I think it was, we had a rash of people with shiny boots and shimmery outfits. Now, when Rudy and I were growing up, you see, we used to dress like that to be aliens. Now, you understand Australians, Australians are pretty cool. They're pretty accepting. If you're an alien, that's okay. But these days, they call them Swifties. So we literally had 300,000 Swifties marching up and down the main streets of Melbourne. And it's quite funny because we're just north of the Melbourne Cricket Ground here, where I live here in East Melbourne. We're just north of the Melbourne Cricket Ground. And you just saw these Swifties, just waves of Swifties showing up. And of course, 3 great shows, $100,000 people a night. In fact, it was loud enough for my younger daughter, to sit on the balcony, listen to the show, and sing along. That's how loud it is. But that's okay. But the point is this: Taylor Swift is American. She's got American ideas in that, and everybody just bought them. So if you ever have a doubt of whether this stuff can sell, well, that lady's doing it. Why not you with what you do? If you want a shimmery hat, okay, we understand the hats. Let's do the next one here. There we go. I want to talk about, whenever we're setting stuff up, we just have to be aware of things like standards. So we're metric here. So, we do kilometers, we do kilograms, and that means that, that's our tool of trade. That's how we work. And so we have to make sure that we're cognizant of that when we're shipping products to Australia. And we were talking before about saying, well, if an American sold us a ton of wheat, they might get punched in the nose. And he said, well, what do you mean? I said, well, you see, when you sell us a ton, that's 2,000 pounds. When we hear a ton, that's 2,200 pounds or 1,000 kilograms. So we think you shortchanged us. So you have to make sure that if you sell a ton, which ton you're talking about. And that's why they have a short ton and a long ton. If you look at the slide, you spell ton T-O-N, we spell ton the French way, which is T-O-N-N-E. But there is a difference. Just be aware of that.
What was it, about 11% difference, something like that?
Yeah. Well, 2,200 pounds. Yeah. That's what you get. But just be very clear on that so that there's no misunderstanding, because there's always room for misunderstanding. Standard sizing and packaging. So, we do things kilograms or 750 grams or whatever. So there's standardized sizes. Be aware of the standardized sizes. We can't make the assumption that our size that we would use in America would automatically suit here. Find out what they're selling and kind of sell along with it. Now, that doesn't mean you have to totally, spend a gazillion dollars to go and change it over to be exactly like us. But at least be aware of where it fits in. So, because I want to make sure that you can sell the product and put it on the shelf. Labeling laws. Be careful on the labeling laws. Different laws apply. What you can say, what you can't say, what you have to quote, how you have to quote it, and so on. A little bit of difference, but it can make a huge difference for you. So I want to make sure that you're right-sided. Now, people, some products from some countries come with, Australian stickers stuck on them, so it translates it for us. That's okay. That works. But yes, we have to get into a conversation, say, well, what do you want to do? What do you want to say? And how do we say it here to make sure that you're compliant? I want to talk about power. Power is 220 volts and 50 hertz. So that's what happens when you plug in the wall. So now I'm showing a hairdryer, and my wife said, did you have to use a hairdryer that looks like it's 30 years old? I said, that's not the point. It's a hairdryer. Now, this is important, because if you don't get this right, you have like I almost had a fire with one of these things. When I first started trying it out, I had taken a plain old hairdryer, and plugged it in, and people say, why don't you use a converter to plug it into the wall? And yes, that's true. The converter changes the voltage. That's fine. But think about how hair dryers work. You put power in there, or you put some power in there to get the heating coils all heated up. And then the hertz, the hertz drive the fan. So what happened was, oh yeah, we converted the voltage all right. So the electric elements were just as hot, but because the hertz are less than in America, so you're 60 hertz, we're 50 hertz here, that means the fan goes 5/6 as fast. So it's not cooling the heating element as quickly. So with a regular hair dryer, the darn thing works on 60 hertz, and that's fine, and it cools with the fan, and of course, it's supposed to dry your hair. Here, my thing was overheating, and it was threatening. If I left it on, it would have melted my hands. So and you say, well, Paul, that's kind of funny, and it doesn't look like you've had to use a hairdryer for a while. I said, absolutely. But the problem is this: think of it, you're running a machine on the assembly line. You set up your motors to go 60 hertz, and all of a sudden we're running them at 50 hertz. Is that a problem? Do you need to adapt it somehow to spin it up so that it goes, you can run on 50 hertz so that we get the same output out of your machine that you expect in America? That's why that's there. So I just want people to, if that's your product, to think about that. We've been talking about agriculture, and I'm noticing, Rudy, that we're coming up to 15 minutes to the hour, so I want to be.
We're good for right now.
We're good for right now? Okay. We're very sensitive here. We're an island. We're isolated. So things that are commonplace back home can be totally devastating here. Now, I was going to ask, I see a lot of people have blacked out their screens, but I was going to get a show of hands of how many people have kids or grandkids or whatever who have bunnies as pets. Yes, fluffy little bunnies, those kinds of things that, eat tulips or whatever they eat carrots. How many people have fluffy little bunnies, right? Now, the question for this audience is, in the state of Queensland, what would happen to you if you're caught in possession of a fluffy bunny? I'll give you the answer. It's a $30,000 fine.
You're kidding
And
me.
the reason is, when the first fleet here, so this is the first fleet of European settlers that came here to start settling the country. Now, with respect to our original peoples, our Aboriginal people here, the place was certainly inhabited, but these good people came from Europe and set up farms and everything else, and set up cities like we would have in Europe. Okay, fair enough. They brought 6 bunnies, 6 of them, and because they wanted some food, and rabbits are an easy way to get food, and they had them there, and they got out. And people say, well, yeah, bunnies get out because that's what bunnies do. They find a way out of the hutch, right? Mm-hmm. At its height, we had 500 million bunnies eating us out of house and home across Australia. To this day, in Queensland, there's something called the rabbit-proof fence. That's 1,000 miles of fence that's constructed so the bunnies don't get through into the pasture lands. That's how serious bunnies are here in Australia. That's why they're terrified of them in Queensland. Now we've come up with ways of controlling the bunnies. So it's a lot, it's not the issue it used to be historically, but that's what one simple, innocuous little thing introduced into this country can do to you. We've got blackberries here. Now, some folks like blackberries, some folks don't like blackberries. I know the bears used to love them when I was back home. People say, well, so what? Well, there's no natural things here that eat blackberries. So as a result, they take over our waterways. So, you might have heard of the man from Snowy River, beautiful river in this country. The farmers can't use it. They say, well, it's full of water. We got the cattle. We want to water the cattle, right? Yes. You go to parts of the Snowy River, you'll see 20 feet on either side, 20 feet of blackberry bushes, because the blackberries love the water. Well, if you've got 20 feet of blackberry bushes, the cows can't go through the blackberry bushes. It hurts their mouths. They can't eat it. So we have a problem. We have people clearing out blackberries all the time because it's an absolute horrible weed for us. And we talk about a couple of other things here, cane toads and carp, things that were introduced here to serve a certain purpose and went totally wrong. This is why, when you're talking to Australians, this is why we're a bit nervous about our agriculture, because the dumbest thing will set us off here because we just don't have any defenses against it. Anyway, opportunities. Here's some things, and we had a bit of a brainstorm, Rudy and I, and I'm sure you good folks will have some others as well. Seasons are reversed here. So we were talking about getting the produce. It's a bumper season for you. We're in the middle of winter. If if your grapes or something else could complement it, we don't have the grapes because they're out of season. We'd love to see it. Hogs. Interesting comment. Now, there might be some hog farmers in Arkansas, just a few. And the reason I've got that up here is this. At least from what I understood, don't get me wrong, I'm not a farmer per se, but I know something about hogs. I used to know that, it used to be a problem with hogs in that hogs in general would have a tapeworm. And as a result, all of them did. And as a result, it cost you a bit of money. You know that you're not only feeding the hog, you're feeding the tapeworm, right? When they have tapeworms. And that's a problem, but, it's something we kind of manage in North America. In Australia, our hogs don't have tapeworms. So you say, well, so what? Well, that means we can produce hogs. It costs us less per pound than it does in America because we don't have tapeworms eating it. We have the hogs eating it, right? Okay. So what do you do? Well, here's your opportunity. If you get yourself, I'm sure you can buy a few breeding pairs of hogs, ship them over to America, find out how we set up our pens for the hogs, and breed up some hogs. And also you're at a competitive advantage to everybody else in the county. Because you don't have the tapeworm, so you can feed them for less, right? Just a dumb opportunity, but that's why I put it up here. It's an opportunity for you, if that makes sense to you. Sheep. Love our sheep. We're very big in sheep. You might say, well, hey, that's something that's different on the American dinner plate. Why don't we get ourselves some sheep? Come on down. We'd love to see it because we have millions of them. Elm trees. Here's something interesting. When I grew up, we had a couple of lovely big elm trees in the backyard. They're beautifully shaped, middle hardness of wood, very handy for furniture. But of course, they got all wiped out by the Dutch elm disease. So we don't have elm trees anymore. But you might want elm trees back in America. Well, guess what? Our elm trees survived. So yes, they had to go and there's stuff you have to put into the roots and everything else to make them survive, but they're now resistant to the bug. So if you'd like to have elm trees back on your property, say on your farms back in Arkansas, why don't you talk to us? We have 6,500 elm trees gazetted here. So they're in the books, in the statutes that are protected here, lining the roadways and the waterways here in Melbourne. If you want some, we can make it easily, ship you some seeds or whatever you like, right? We have housing. How about housing in Queensland? Housing materials. People say, well, what do you mean? There are no building materials available in Queensland for building houses. So I was talking to a colleague in Townsville, which is an army town, and it's a central town in probably central Queensland. And he says, we're desperate for housing, but we have nothing to build the houses with because we have the Olympics going on in 2032. All the housing materials have been soaked up and sent down to Brisbane to build up student villages, whatever they do to set up the Olympics. They don't have it. If you supply housing materials, we'd like to hear from you. Rudy and I have talked for a long time about lithium. I only found this out because it's a secret to us here. We actually mine lithium, we design and build batteries here. That might be a big thing for you too. Now I know Rudy was talking about that they're now starting to look at how to mine lithium in Arkansas. There's an opportunity he's got. Well, it's nothing wrong. It's a first step one. You say, well, if we haven't got anything up and running, you might want to import our batteries because these guys supply the army and everything else because they're the only suppliers that are not from China.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, 46% of lithium in the world is produced or mined in Australia. Everybody thinks it's the Chinese. The Chinese are actually relatively small producers. I think about 12%, and Australia is 42%.
So you start off by importing our product, but then you can talk to these guys about licensing what they do with their lithium to make it nice, make it the purity you need, and you guys can start making your own. We've talked about skilled talent. Everybody needs skilled talent, different time zones. We're talking. I'm sorry, Jonathan, I see a hand.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so one of my questions is, we're going over some of the products that you guys are in need of and what we may be able to sell to you, and you say reach out to us. What would be a good starting point for our clients that are on this call? What's a good, say that, they're like, hey, I can produce that and get it to Australia. What would be their first call? What would be their first step of getting into Australia?
I think if you talk to Rudy is a good starting point because he connects with me and he's in your time zone. We can get it connected, but what we would do would be to probably set up a tour. So we'd say, okay, what trade shows are running that are relevant to your line of business? Because you might as well come down, have a look, kick around. What are they showing? What are they displaying? Who's here? Who am I? Do I see my competitors here, or is nobody here? I've had both. And so if you go around, you can save yourself a ton of money by coming down, kick around the trade show, talk to people on the stands, find out what's going on, who's who at the zoo, who's supplying here in Australia already. You might say, hey, our guys aren't here yet. Nobody's touching Australia. We'll be here. I've had people come out and say, or I've had talked to people that were shipping stuff wanted to ship stuff to Australia. They said, okay, Paul, send me a website where they have, where they actually sell this stuff retail. So we did. He says, don't worry, Paul. We see all of our competitors there. We know how to beat them in our country. So what to show up? We know how to fight that battle. And that was it. So we can really help, working with Rudy and myself, we really help accelerate you understanding the lay of the land here to say, there's my opportunity. I remember there's one guy, it was amazing. I actually met him on the plane. Now, this was showing my age here, but this was right after 9/11. And of course, a lot of people were grounded. So a lot of people could not travel to represent their companies. That, it was not a safe time to travel. But I was talking to an American in the seat beside me. He says, yeah, it's horrible. He says, but we have to get on with life. He says, and I said, but you're traveling. How do you feel about that? He says, it's the biggest opportunity in the world. I said, what do you mean? He says, my competitors aren't traveling. They're still at home. So he went and picked up all the business in Australia. His competitors couldn't get out here to service.
Yeah. And that kind of gets back to the comments that that you've been making since the beginning, Paul, and that is kind of do the opposite. Look at the opportunities that are opposite from what we're used to, and time zones, and the Western Hemisphere, and all of that, and just look at the differences. But I think that the one thing that I keep emphasizing is to pay attention to the differences. They can be an advantage or they can be a problem, but you need to know which one it is. Is it an opportunity because of the difference, or is it a problem because of the difference? And you have to assume from the very, very beginning that there is a difference, and find out what those differences are to make sure that you don't get tripped up on it. Now, we've only got just a few more minutes now. I don't see any questions, and I'm going to ask people to unmute if they want to ask a question, or raise your hand. That's probably the better way to do it. Raise your hand. I do want you to know that there is some links that Heidi has provided to you in the chat that has some additional information on Australia that we've provided. And if you want to know, well, I wonder if Australia buys or sells X. If you look at that list, you're going to see all the things that Australia both buys and sells, buys from us, and sells to us there. And so take a look at that list and see if it's something that you guys can provide. Paul, did you have any last comment?
I would just stuck this slide. We don't have to go through it, but I just stuck this up. So this is another generator of opportunity. All these sporting events, international sporting events that we run. And there's, so as I say, there's not only opportunities for entertainment, obviously, bringing your newly found friends here in Australia to a corporate event. That sounds great. And this is one of the tennis courts at the Australian Open. And as you see, how close the center of town is from the Australian Open. So you actually walk back home after a good night at the tennis. But I mean, if you're in the business of training, promotion, merchandise, equipment, travel packages, all the things that go around that particular sport, there'd be opportunities for you. And there's, as you see, there's a lot of events going on. So there's something you do that fits into it. I don't know, maybe coaching clinics, fitness clinics. Everybody wants to work. All these teams want to work at their best. And they're prime athletes. They want to get what's that critical edge. If that's what you train in, maybe that's an opportunity for you. So I'm just showing, here's another thing to start exploring if that's where your business is, because we certainly have a lot of the sport here, and we could, our talent certainly wants to be at the peak of their condition and that to perform. And if you can help them with that, they'd love to hear from you. So I guess the only thing is, the more you ask, the more we dig into it, we can find something that, as I say, might open some doors for you.
Very good.
You'd certainly be more than welcome here.
So with that, Paul, let's go ahead and open it up for questions. If you guys would raise your hands, if you have a question, we'd be happy to discuss it.
Now,
Rudy,
shall I
I'll
stop sharing?
Go
Shall I
ahead,
stop
Jonathan.
sharing, Rudy? Would that be helpful?
Sure. Yeah, go ahead and do that, Paul. Thank you.
There you go. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'll go ahead and open it up for another question. How is it working with the foreign services or the embassy or anything along those lines to kind of break in to that market there?
Sure. Obviously, using commercial service and the embassies is a great place to start as well. They don't do a whole lot of hand holding, but if you just want some general information, they're absolutely a great resource. They have the Gold Key program that's kind of coming back online. It was not being offered for a little while there during COVID, because nobody was traveling and all of that. But I think that Gold Key is being reinstituted. So there's a lot of opportunities and a lot of resources with the federal government. And I suspect the commercial service and the embassy in Australia interface with each other and can answer lots of questions about X, Y, and Z.
I think an important thing too is be aware that a lot of governments, like even state governments, will own a corner of a trade show. So let's say, okay, let's say here are the products, here's products and services from the state of Arkansas, boom, and they'll own the stand. They might invite 6 producers to sit on the stand. So for a smaller operator, if you have a smaller business, you can sit on the stand, and it's not just your stand. You're backed by the state of Arkansas, and by the way, you have your place on the stand. And that's a very efficient way for the smaller operator to go and present at a trade show, but still get visibility, because of course Arkansas would have something of some substance. Hey, let's check that out. It's clearly a draw card, and people, that draws people to the stands. So that might be a way of that you work with your state authorities to leverage their presence to get yourself on the stand and make yourself known.
Yeah, and trade shows are great. For the reasons that Paul was designating a little while ago. You have buyers and sellers showing up at those trade shows. You just need to make sure that you select the right ones. Questions? Well, gosh, Paul, you must have done a tremendous job. Oh, hang on, there's one here from Tommy. Is there any demand for food processing and or packaging equipment? And I think I can answer that pretty clearly. The answer is yes to both.
Yes. Food processing is huge here in Australia. And yes, certainly equipment, if it gives us, makes it efficient, it helps reduce our costs, and so you have some very good product in that line, we'd certainly like to hear from you. And it's interesting, you say, well, why is that? Well, not only Australia is a huge agriculture, I think agriculture is number 4 or something in the exports from Australia. We're very big in that. But the mark made in Australia really plays well in Asia, because they've had some problems with some product not being what it should have been. And I know, for example, baby food. You try selling baby food in China, they might chase you out of there because they had some real problems with some kids getting awfully sick. But they see made in Australia stamped on it, love you.
Yeah, and Paul, to your point right there, and you stated it earlier, Australia is now being used more and more as the distribution center to Asia. And so here you can find partners in Australia that will act as your go-between, your distribution channel to Asia.
Yes, and it's a pure logistics hub. Absolutely. It makes it that much easier. As I said, you're working in your own language. It's familiar to you, easy to do business, regular rules of business, something you understand, and then we can go and reach Asia in their own time zones at their convenience.
All right. Well, I think we're going to wrap it up since I don't see any more questions. If you guys would do us the favor of filling out the survey, that lets us know, how we're doing, and that way we can make improvements. Now, I do see another question from Tommy. Tommy, could you throw that back up again? Let me see here.
It says that we're into pecans, but we know Stallman has been there for many years. They also grow macadamia nuts.
Mm-hmm. Well, I would suggest this is again where a bit of a market survey would be worthwhile. Literally walking around, just talking to suppliers. Are you being served well? What do you think about the freshness? What do you think about the quality? What do you think about the pricing?
Yeah,
there may be an angle in there for you.
Yeah,
because we don't go for monopolies here, so a little bit of competition might help us all out.
Well, not only that, a lot of people, they say, well, there's already competition. Well, that's what you want, though, because if there is no competition, it may be because there's no market, and so you just have to do things better than the other guy, right? Having competition is not a bad thing. As a matter of fact, you often see CVS and Walgreens right across from each other, right?
Yeah.
So that's a good indicator that there are people who are buying X, Y, and Z. That's not a bad thing. All right, guys, I think we're going to go ahead and wrap it up in the interest of everyone's time. Thank you so much for having arrived on time and being, understanding of the things that we're saying here. I think that Paul has really provided a lot of really good insight, and the biggest takeaway, I think, is understand the differences, see where the opportunities are in those differences, and where there may be some hindrances as well, but pay attention to the differences, both good and bad. And with that, I think we will close it.
Thank you, everyone,
you.
for attending. Thank you, Mr. Ostaff.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Paul.